In the final video in this unit, we're going to talk about plagiarism. What is plagiarism? Well, in general, plagiarism occurs when an author uses something like words or ideas from another person or source without giving credit to that source so that other people looking at it think it originated with that author, and the author gets credit for something that really were the ideas or work of someone else. That's a general definition. But plagiarism is viewed differently in different fields. For instance, Scotland points out that news writers get their news from a wire service and they just sort of rewrite it. And that's considered normal, and it's not considered plagiarism. Preachers may borrow from one another's sermons, and that's considered okay. In fact, the one that's borrowed from may consider it an honor if somebody hints at things that they've said because it says, oh, that's important. And then there's also this idea of intertextuality. Could you explain what that is?
Actually, intertextuality occurs all the time. Whenever we talk about anything, we have to draw our learning and experience from the past. Maybe some people who said something we remember, we talk about it. Or some terms we remember, we elaborated on it. So that's intertextuality. I borrow what you said into my discourse, you borrow what I said into your discourse. So we can talk to each other.
And it becomes so much part of us that we don't think about where we got it from. And so is it really still theirs, or have we made it so much part of us that it's no longer theirs, but it's actually ours?
It's really hard to tell. It's already fully integrated into your knowledge and your discourse.
Right. So academic plagiarism is a little bit different from this general feeling of plagiarism. If you look at university definitions of plagiarism, it often talks about it as theft of another person's ideas or words, or fraud, where you're claiming that their work is yours, or copyright infringement, a legal term, because you're not giving credit to the original source. Scotland, in his work, quotes Senongi, and he says that even though we can't agree on specifics in terms of defining plagiarism, we know it when we see it. Just like pornography, which is an interesting thing because, again, it's hard to define what's pornography and what's nude art, but we know there's a difference in how it affects us.
In other words, when you see it, you say, this is pornography, you can tell. But if you want me to define it, I cannot define it clearly. But as soon as we see it, we know, aha, this is it.
Right. And so we as professors see that when we look at people's papers.
You can see the writing style is very different from one paragraph to the other. Mm-hmm. And you can also see some grammatical mistakes in one paragraph, which are not repeated in the rest of the paper. So, and also sometimes when they quote a certain author, like 2002, they say 2002A without B. Then we say, aha, that's evidence you copied from somebody else, because what is 2002A without B?
Mm-hmm. Right, so there are a number of things that we as teachers look at and can very easily pick out things, even if the students think that it's well hidden.
Sometimes it's a British English versus American English. Different styles occur in the same paper.
Right.
So this is all evidence we as professionals can spot easily.
Right. So again, Power asked a question of the students that she was interviewing. She said, is plagiarism more like stealing a grape from a supermarket when you're looking at it and you just want to taste and see whether it's good before you buy? Or is it more like stealing a car?
These are all not as important as stealing someone's spouse, right? That's more important. If you say, this is my husband, they say, No, he's my husband. That's a serious matter.
How does that relate to plagiarism?
It's like, take it, you plagiarize, you take somebody else's work as yours. You take somebody else's spouse as yours.
I see.
That's a serious matter.
So you think it's more like stealing a car, or even more serious than stealing a car?
Yes, exactly.
She also asked, does it matter whether it's in school just for a paper or whether it's for profit in some way, whether it's academic or actually physical profit? And again, it's an open question. It's not a fixed answer.
Plagiarism is a big problem in academic integrity, and a lot of people's degrees can be revoked because later they were found plagiarizing.
Right.
That's why I treat this as a serious matter. It's not just stealing a grape or stealing a car. It's stealing someone's child.
Okay, so again, the students gave many reasons why they plagiarized in class. Said it's easy to do, they were confident they wouldn't get caught, they were pressured for grades, or they just really didn't care about the assignment or thought the professor didn't give enough time. Or who cares, there's no victim. So they thought it was less important in a school context than it might be outside. But you are building habits. And if you build a habit as a student, it's much harder to break that once you get out. They also gave other reasons like laziness or procrastination. And again, these are habits that it's important to break before you get out into the real world, as it's called.
So in other words, students need strategies to learn how not to copy and paste and claim this is my work. Actually, it's not.
Right. So they need to be aware that they're plagiarizing, know how to avoid it, and learn how to rephrase. And so again, that will be the focus for what we'll talk about in the rest of this video. There are three things that are considered plagiarism. One is copying directly without citation. That's pretty obvious. But a lot of people think, oh, if I just substitute some words or change the order, that's okay. But those are considered plagiarism as well. Let's give an example. The first is something from another textbook. Copying a paragraph, making only small changes, such as replacing a few verbs or adjectives with synonyms. Now, if I wanted to make that my own, and I say copying a paragraph and making a few minor changes, like changing some of the verbs or replacing adjectives with other words meaning the same thing, is that okay?
Well, did you cite who wrote this paragraph to begin with?
No, if I claim it for myself,
Then it's not okay.
why not?
Look at
It's all different.
It's not that different. Look at all the substitutions.
Only small, a few minor, such as, like, a few, some. Synonyms, other words meaning the same thing. I just plugged in other words so it looks different, but I could not have written that unless I was reading that other work. I could not have written it that closely just out of my mind. Same with reordering. People often cut and paste. And again, this is from another textbook. Cutting and pasting a paragraph by using the sentences of the original, but leaving one or two out, or by putting one or two sentences in a different order. And if I say putting one or two sentences in a different order, or leaving one or two out, but basically cutting and pasting a paragraph from the original. I've just flipped the paragraph.
Exactly.
But I could not have written that myself. It's impossible that I, out of my mind, would have written something that close to the original.
You didn't tell us where this paragraph come from.
Right. So if I claim that as my own writing, that would be considered plagiarism. If I write something myself about a topic that other people have written about, I'm going to use the same ideas and the same words. I have to. But the important thing is that I should write it without looking at that other work. I need to place it in the context of my own work, rewriting it, or adding examples, making it longer or shorter. That's considered paraphrasing. And then it's not considered plagiarism. So there's a metaphor that you could use here of a pitcher and water. If the other article is a pitcher full of water, you can't take that or pour it into the same shaped pitcher and say, this is mine, obviously. But you also, when you pour it into a glass, you don't pour the whole thing. You pour a small part and then you make it your own. You use it for your own use.
So in other words, first you have to say, what is this content? It's water. It's not tap water, it's boiled water. First tell us about the content, and then the original shape. In other words, the wording of the original concept is like a pitcher, but you want to put it in a glass, so the form is different. In other words, you not only tell people the source of the water, you also repackage the water into some other form to meet your own needs in your own context.
Right. And so again, you did this in your work where you looked at Preston's work and he came up with a conclusion, but then you put that in the context of your own work, where he talked about the European French and Quebec French having different norms for theta substitution and therefore being different speech communities. And then you said, we're going to do something different. We're going to look at Chinese learners of English in China and Taiwan and whether they are different speech communities or not.
Exactly. So the variation in theta substitution is like the water.
Mm-hmm.
And then I put it in another pitcher or another glass like this.
Right.
Water in a glass in Chinese context.
So that you could use it for your own purposes. And then that's okay. So again, plagiarism is very important in academic culture. Students that plagiarize can fail a class. Professors that plagiarize or politicians that plagiarize can be fired or lose their job because of plagiarism.
Or lose the election.
So it's very, very important to avoid plagiarism. And the most difficult part is writing the introduction or literature review, because you're taking from a whole bunch of other sources and trying to make it your own. So how do you avoid plagiarism in that case? I suggest that you read an article at least 2 times, maybe 3 or 4 times, to make sure that you understand what it says. And then make a few notes, just the keywords, no sentences, no phrases, just a few keywords. And then set that aside for at least 2 hours. Because if you try to write again within 2 hours, it'll still be there in your mind and it'll be a little too close.
That's a good strategy. It also has a theoretical foundation. Mm-hmm. In other words, when you listen to something or read something, you will understand the concept and also remember the form when it's too close to the occurrence. But after a while, you forget about the form. How is it said? You don't remember, but you keep the concept. That's exactly what you are teaching students to do.
Right.
Set it aside for a while. Then the concept will finally crystallizes and you forget about the original form and put it in your own glass.
Right. And so after a couple hours, then you write it and write it in the context of your own research, and then you'll be okay. The final thing is, remember that you're going to revise. And as you revise, make sure that you change. Don't say, oh, that's so good, I can't change it. Make sure that you revise to make it better organization, clearer, make your corrections. if you do that revision process several times, by the time you're done, it will be far enough away from the original that it won't be plagiarism.